not Steve. I'm Carl, the vice chair. And so Steve's on vacation this week. I'll be running this meeting when Ellie's not. The first item on our agenda is to call this meeting to order on October 8th, 2024, the governing board meeting of Maple Broadband. And our first item is to approve the agenda. Has everyone received that agenda?
Yep.
Great. So I move to approve our agenda for today's meeting.
Second.
Great. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the agenda? Say aye. Or raise your hand.
Aye.
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 Great. Next on our agenda then is to approve our minutes from last meeting, September 10th. Has everyone had a chance to review those?
I'd like to point out Paul Mikulich emailed me ahead of time to catch some sloppy errors that referred to July when it should have said September, and then referred to September when it should have said October. So the meeting was for September and the next meeting is October. So I'd like to suggest that we approve with those friendly amendments as well as any others that may come from the floor.
Sounds good to me. Are there any other amendments to the minutes?
Yeah. Looks like Ellie is listed twice. Not that she doesn't deserve it, but.
Oh, man.
All right, so noted.
Yep.
All right, if that's all the comments on our meetings, I move that we approve our minutes from last meeting.
With those two friendly amendments.
With the amendments, correct.
I'll second that.
All right, discussion? All in favor or not? So we'll start with in favor.
All
I'll
right.
say it.
Aye.
Are there any nays? Any abstentions? Either way, we passed. It's approved. Next item up for topic is public comments. Do we have any members of the public who would like to express their opinions on Maple Broadband? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Next up is a report on operations, and I'll hand this over to Ellie.
You skipped something very important, Carl.
Oh, excuse me. I did go 4 to 6. 5's a very important number. We have a new treasurer that we need to vote on appointing to take over. And so, not sure. Is this the actual vote on it right now, Ellie?
This is the vote. So just teeing up the vote. Thank you for that, Carl. So Sai was not able to make it today. She's also on vacation, believe it or not, on a trip to visit a grandchild. So congratulations to her. So I will do my best to cover for her in the update sections later. But wanted to just remind everyone of the details. So I sent around the resume and then a short bio of Lynn Dunton, who's the proposed new treasurer. So Sai and I have both met with her. We're both very happy. And Sai wanted to make sure that everyone was aware this appointment would take place. So Lynn would be the new treasurer as from November 1st, so the beginning of next month. But Sai will obviously be working with her very closely in the coming months. So it's not like we're going to appoint a new treasurer and Sai is going to just drop everything and walk away. She is explicitly committed and wanted to make sure that everyone knew that she would be working very closely with Lynn over the coming months to make sure that she actually comes up to speed and is able to really step into Sai's shoes without any sort of disruption at all. So with that, I think maybe we can have a discussion if anyone has any questions or anything like that, and then you can move to a vote, Carl.
Sure. Any questions or discussions on the transition of our new treasurer?
Yeah, Carl, this is Paul. Yeah, is she present at this meeting?
She's not.
Oh, she's not. Okay. If she was, I would have asked her to say a few words about herself. But since she's not, I did look through the resume. She is a very strong candidate, and I fully support appointing her as treasurer.
Thank you.
Carl, this is Ross Conrad. I'll make a motion to accept the application of Lynn Dutton as treasurer for Maple Broadband.
Excellent.
I'll second. This is Paul Nikolic.
Great. Any further discussion on this before we vote? All right, so I move to accept the application for our new treasurer. Oh, you already did that, so. Hey, it's my first time, I'm sorry.
You're doing great, Carl.
It's all good.
It's a great.
So since there is no more discussion, then we'll ask for a vote. All who vote in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? And any abstentions? The ayes have it.
Janae has her hand up. And one more thing before you
Oh.
move on, Carl.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Janae was. Were you abstaining, Janae, or were you voting affirmatively?
Affirmatively, with
Great.
stars around it.
Wonderful. So it looks like unanimous approval then. So Carl, there's another matter that we didn't add to the agenda explicitly, which is that we also need to approve a stipend for Lynn Dunton. So she had indicated, as discussed last month, that she would like a stipend. I thought it made sense to have this as a separate motion, just to be clear for the record.
Sure. So then the next motion is to approve a stipend for the new treasurer. And I move for that vote.
In the amount of $1,000 a month.
Thank you.
Second.
Is there a second? All right. Any discussion on this? We're all good with the stipend of $1,000 a month for our wonderful new treasurer. All right. Let's have that vote then. All the ayes? If you're
Aye.
in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? And abstentions? Very good. The motion passes. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. All right. So moving right along, we'll go to operations now, and I'll turn it back to Ellie for an update on our operations and construction.
Sure thing. So the latest active subscriber count that we have is 448. That was from last week, so we might be over 450 by now, but I don't want to be putting the cart before the horse. But we are approaching that mark, which is great. And in terms of operations, we've had a flurry of activity in the last week or so down in Leicester. So the construction crews, the civils were completed about 2 weeks ago. So pouring the construction pad, we waited for that to cure. And starting today and continuing tomorrow, the crews are working to set the enclosure on that pad. And the splicers have been out there splicing, and we still need to get the test results and make sure that all is looking good. But turning up that Leicester hub and the transport routes and so on, we're in the latest financial model, I projected that would happen in November, and it might even happen this month because we are sitting on the 8th and have made very good progress towards that. So I think that's it. Does anyone have any questions about where we are construction-wise or operations-wise?
I don't have any questions, but just out of curiosity, can people hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes, we can hear you.
No, I'll keep saying ayes then.
Thank
Please
you.
do. Please do, Rich.
All right, then I guess we can move on to marketing and public relations.
Okay, so the big marketing update is that, as you all know, for many months now, we've been working on a set of marketing automation emails that will go out automatically to customers to keep them apprised of where they are from the time that they place their order until they actually get installed. And so we had a check-in call with London Middlebury yesterday, and they were putting the final touches on that. And if it hasn't gone live already today, it will be tomorrow. So I'm really excited about that because it's a big milestone, making sure that we got not only the wording right, but more to the point that we got the technical hooks right, that people are getting emails at the right time and not at the wrong time. And everything has been fully vetted with Waitsfield to make sure that the way that they're using CrowdFiber aligns with how we think they're using it in order to make sure that the emails go out at the right time. So this is really good, and I really hope that it will improve and facilitates customers' impressions of the progress or of the process from requesting an order to being installed. So that's the really big highlight. Other than that, I put into the second email that I sent out today, London Middlebury, as you have probably seen between the social posts and hopefully the governing board mail that I sent out earlier today, they're doing some market research. And so some of that is qualitative customer interviews. So they did, as of yesterday, they'd done 9, and they want to have at least 10. I sent them one more customer. But by the way, if anyone knows of a Maple Broadband customer, either that's had that has I guess maybe some constructive feedback for us. I mean, we know that we have many happy customers, but having someone that has something more substantive to say than everything was great is kind of what they're looking for here. So, if anyone is or has a friend that you think might be willing to participate in a one-on-one customer interview, please let me know and I'll connect you and see if there's a little bit more space for that, because I want to have at least 10. So a couple more wouldn't hurt. And then the other thing as well is, Janae, you've got your hand up. Let me just finish this bit and then you can talk. The other thing as well is there's also a survey, which I sent you all the link, and I am encouraging all of you to fill it out as well as to circulate it to your networks. We're aiming for at least 300 responses on that survey, and we're at nearly 200 now, which is great, but we still have another 100 to go. So wanted to make sure that we use the governing board as well to get that message out. So the general timeline here is that by late November, early December, London Middlebury will not only have completed the research that they're busy with right now and synthesized it, but then will be working with me on a strategy, and this will be all in preparation for our 2025 marketing plan. So very excited about the progress, and I'm eagerly anticipating seeing the results. We had our weekly call yesterday, and they offered to share preliminary feedback, and I said, no, I don't want to hear any preliminary feedback. I want to hear the final feedback. But I'm really, really excited for that. Janae, go ahead.
Hi, it's Janai, but don't worry.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Janai.
It's okay. It's a hard name. No problem. I was just going to say I would be happy to do that. We just had Maple Broadband installed in Orwell. It was a very good experience. Do have some feedback that I'd be happy to share with you in it. So if I qualify, I'm happy to be a person that can give that to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. I will put you in touch with them.
Sounds great.
Hey, Zapata.
Hi, Ellie. Wondering if as part of your marketing to get the survey out, if you're going to be posting it on Front Porch Forums?
We did already once, and that was a couple of weeks ago, like maybe 2 weeks ago. So we'll probably post it again because things do get lost in the flurry. But we only have two. Yeah, we only have 2 posts a month that are free, and then after that we have to. I shouldn't say free. We pay for a subscription whereby at a dramatically reduced cost we are able to have 2 community engagement posts a month, and we have to pay. So we used our 2 in September, and I'll speak to London Middlebury about doing another one in October. Okay. Anything else on marketing? All right.
Okay. Does that take care of other? Item C, other in operations. Did you have anything else to add, Ellie?
I have nothing else to add. Does anyone have any questions on anything?
All right.
Okay.
Well, then we'll move on to the next item, which is financials, and we'll take a look at the dashboard and see where we're at.
All right, let me get that up and I will share my screen. This is going to be fun because I'm on a laptop, so it's a small screen anyway. All right. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so this is the September dashboard. I don't think there's really any dramatic changes from last month in terms of the numbers that we're showing here. I think we did put a comment down here about the continuing negative cash balance in the construction grant. So there's 2 outstanding invoices to the VCBB, one of which here for almost 700,000. I forget which one is which. I mean, they're for $50,000 difference. But one of these should be paid within the next 30 days, and the other one may be a bit longer because we're going back and forth on some of the final deliverables related to our phase 1 grant closeout. But either way, with one of these being paid, we'll go back over the positive on the construction side. And I've budgeted one of them to be paid this year, the other to be paid next year, just to be conservative. So that's that. Are there any questions on this part of the dashboard around the cash situation? Okay, and because I'm on my laptop, I can't see if someone has a hand up. So if you do have a question, please just start talking. That's probably going to be easier. Or
I
someone else
don't
can
think
monitor
it-
hands.
Yep.
Okay.
No hands yet.
Okay, great. So budget versus actual. So this, oh, I can make this a little bigger as well so that we can see it. So as usual, the cells that I've changed, I highlighted in orange, and then I put in a note where it seemed like I need an explanatory note. So most of these are essentially just updating to be more of a true up around projecting what looks like an actual reality. And then, of course, you will also see, or you have also seen these exact same numbers on the 2024 pro forma, which is our projection through the end of the year that we need to distribute out to our member towns. So, yeah. Whoops, sorry. So on the income side, we have the grant that I just mentioned, sorry, the construction invoice I just mentioned, the 647,216, that's the one I expect to be paid this year for sure. And then on the pre-construction side, we submit quarterly reimbursement invoices based on what we actually spent. In the third quarter, we spent $110,075.11. So we have that invoice that Darlene just raised for me today, and we'll be issuing it, and those are usually paid within 30 days. So definitely expect that in before the end of the year, as well as the remainder of the BEAD subrecipients capacity grants that we'll get before the end of the year. And other than that, like I said, I've just gone through and updated the projections here to be in line with what I think they'll actually be by the end of the year. Did anyone have any questions on this or anything I can answer? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move on to operations. And if someone does have a question, then we can always come back. So on the operations side, this is the last month that we'll be showing the projections from the May business plan because I've just revised it now for October and I'm continuing to refine it. So we are a little bit short of our projections in terms of where we thought we'd be in terms of mileage with service and passings at this point. And the difference is literally 5.7 miles of areas where we're waiting on Green Mountain Power to do some line rebuilds in Shoreham and Orwell. Yeah, Shoreham and Orwell, those are the only 2 towns. So I've now moved those out to next year. And like I said, we will be we'll have a new comparison to plan starting from next month. So our mileage with service and our passings didn't change at all month over month. We do have the transport route that we're going to be turning up later this year, either later this month or next month. We did have 30 installations, and we're 48 active subscribers, and yeah, of which phone service 81. So, anyone have any questions on this? Okay. If not, I'll stop sharing this. We can move on to the more fun discussion, which is the budget, right? Once we get there.
Oh, I'm muted. Okay. Yes, moving on to the 2025 draft budget then.
I'm sorry. I misled you there, Carl. The next on the agenda is actually the audit update, and then I'll get into the budget. But the audit update is brief, which is to say that we're still working through it. I think Sai and I both thought that we were close to the end, and then we received a whole other whack of requests for information from our auditor. So we are working through those. And making good progress. And like she said last month, it is our first time doing asset capitalization, and we are, as part of the BEAD subrecipient grant, we're using some of that money to write down the processes and just make sure that this is going to be all much more streamlined going forward, so that when we do this next year, it's not going to take anywhere near as long as it's taken this year. So again, not really any cause for concern, although just from a governance standpoint, it should not be taking us this long to get through our audits. And that is not, it is, as I said, it's our intent to make sure that we get through these things much more expeditiously going forward. Does anyone have any questions about the audit? Okay. Now,
Now
Good,
we
Carl.
can move on.
now we can move on to the budget and the annual report. So maybe I should start with the annual report. Let me actually get that up because I don't have that one up on my computer. So just a reminder here of the context that under statutes, we are required to distribute to our member towns three draft things for discussion purpose by the end of the month of October. And by the end of the month of November, we need to have a public hearing on the things that we've distributed. And then in December, we need to actually finalize them. So those three things are: number one, an annual report of the district's activities; number two, a pro forma, which is essentially a financial projection of our financials through the end of the current year that we're in; and then the third thing is a budget for the following year. So I distributed to you in the board pack that I sent out late last night, there were two documents. One is an annual report, and the form of that looks exactly the same right now as it did last year. London Middlebury is obviously going to be working on refreshing and updating that form. I've discussed some ideas with them about how to make it even more readable and even more engaging than it was last year. We're going to want to put in some sort of a map as well. But basically what I want to do with you folks tonight is to go through the contents of what we're reporting as our major achievements and just make sure we're aligned with that. And then the other document was the 2024-2025 budget document. So it's the pro forma through the end of 24, which of course is consistent with what you've been seeing all along, essentially in the profit and loss to actual in the dashboard. And the item of much more interest is the 2025 budget. And of even more interest than the numbers in the budget is the narrative and the story and the assumptions that underline or that informed that. So before going through the budget documents, I wanted to walk you guys through a deck I put together that just gives a little bit of history as to where we are, what's coming next, and a little bit of the complexities that go into planning this budget. The other quick thing I wanted to say quickly before we start to look at the annual report is just to let you guys all know, is I had to remind myself multiple times that this the annual report and the budget that we are talking about now and that I'd like to get your support to distribute to the member towns, these are drafts for discussion purposes. They don't need to be final, and as a matter of fact, they're not expected to be final, because especially with what's going on now, there's a lot of uncertainty around the BEAD program and around things like pre-award expenditures and if those are going to be allowed, and if so, back to what date. And hopefully by the time we finish our final budget, things that are now unclear will actually be clear, and we can make an informed decision one way or the other about what things are actually looking like. We're also continuing to refine the cost estimates of how much things are going to cost. So I'm putting that out there so that you guys understand what's clear in my head, which is that I think this is it's a good draft budget, but it's definitely a draft, and I fully expect to be making some changes to it, some refinements to it in the November meeting at least, and hopefully November and December will look pretty close together. Any questions about that before I pull up the annual report so we can talk about it? Okay. Hearing none. Okay, that is tiny. So this boilerplate text at the top is exactly the same as it was last year. So as I said, London Middlebury will be helping us with the form and the boilerplate. So it's really this part here, which is the accomplishments from 2024, which I split into ours and those from Waitsfield. So I got from them a long updated rating out of which I pulled the actual bullets of achievements from 2024. And then the next page is forward looking. So I only set this out a day ago, so I'm not sure if everyone had a chance to read it, but these are the bullets of what we've accomplished in this year. And actually, just reading it now, I realize I'm going to make my own comment, which is that we should update this first bullet. This is how many new miles we launched service, and so we should also add what our total mileage is by the end of the year. So otherwise, it's a little bit misleading as to what we've actually done. But yeah, so we built and launched service across 135.9 miles. That's forward looking. I'm presuming that the transport route that we're busy finishing now will get launched in the next 3 months. And we will have met our construction obligations on schedule and under budget, delivered broadband service to over 450 customers. Again, we can update this number as we get closer to the time. Maybe we'll be at 500 by the end of the year. You never know. We obtained 619,800 in new grant funding. So that was the VCBB Town ARPA match and the BEAD subrecipient capacity award. And then I put this in here as well because it's we've done a lot of things under marketing, but I think this is the best simple encapsulation that I could come up with. So would love any feedback from anyone, either right now today in this meeting or later on, about things that you think we should include here.
Ellie, this is Paul.
Hey, Paul.
Do you think you should put in under the accomplishments a bullet regarding the marketing and community outreach efforts? I think that was pretty positive as well.
The you mean the automation emails?
Yeah, the emails, reaching out to the community, informing them of, the work that's being done, when service is going to be available.
Okay, thank you. Oops. Anyone have anything else?
I don't know if there's gonna be room, but you might want to say something about the launch of our program to provide assistance for low income folks and access that way, for, access. I don't
Okay,
know.
that's a good one.
Just a thought.
Yeah, because it wasn't a new program. We launched it last year, but what we did do is we enhanced the amount, and
Right, right.
in fairness, it only applies to 2 people, but it's more the principle of the thing.
Yep.
That's a great addition. Okay, so again, if anything else occurs to you guys, just feel free to drop me an email. So the forward-looking statements are basically talking about that we have active service across portions of 12 member towns, which is actually kind of amazing. And then talking about how, just because again, 2 years ago we were at 0, so we now have service across 12 portions of 12 towns, which is really something when you think about it. And then it's talking about our primary construction funding up to this point and what it's enabled us to do. And then just again, giving the context that there's some areas that we're not allowed to build to. And so as we reach the end of the grant funding, we plan to continue through additional grant funding, number 1, and then taking on debt. And then it's talking about we intend to jointly apply for the BEAD program with Waitsfield, and this will help us reach the remaining unserved addresses. And then finally, just circling back to certain portions are not eligible for us to build under either program, and so that's why we want to take on some debt. And as you see from the budget, my current estimate of that is $2 million. Okay. Any thoughts on this?
That's a surprising low number of amount of debt. Obviously, would expect it to be higher.
Yeah. Yeah, and it might be as we continue to refine the numbers, but let's get to that when we get to the budget discussion.
Okay.
So again, as you guys read this again, feel free to send me any thoughts that you have. So I'm going to save this and move to the budget discussion now. Does anyone have anything else in the annual report before I do this? Okay, great. So I had some fun putting this together for you to just make sure that everyone was able to walk through my thinking and the assumptions of putting together this budget. So here is our 2025 budget planning discussion. So the first thing is just to give a more detailed update as to where we are in the Act 71 construction grant. So the written grant obligations were 244.3 miles and 2,748 passings. So currently, as of today, we are 219 miles and 3,050 passings. So we've exceeded the passings in our grants, but we are under in terms of mileage. And then the transport ring that we're busy with right now is going to bring us to 233.4 miles, which is 96%. So very shortly that'll be up. And then the remaining 11 or so miles is going to be required to bring us up to that grant requirement. So I expect that we'll finish the transport ring with that actually may be a little bit conservative because we were further along than I thought in terms of how much we've paid for and the final invoices. I'm not sure how many more invoices are coming in, but that might be a little bit on the conservative side. But I expect that we'll complete the transport ring with at least $1 million left in construction funds. And then again, conservatively, after the remaining 11 miles, we will have approximately $500,000 left in the construction grant. So
Hey, Ellie,
yeah.
If you intend to display the spreadsheet, you're not doing it right now.
I'm not. Oops, I meant to be showing a PowerPoint deck, but it is probably still showing the old PowerPoint deck. Let me stop this and reshare. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for breaking in there. Now this is going to make a lot more sense to you when you're not looking at the annual reports and just hearing me blather on. Okay, so that's where we are in terms of the Act 71 construction grant. So one of the reasons that we are needing less debt is that we have been able to complete not only our construction obligations, but more than our construction obligations. The fact that we finished on budget is, of course, a good thing. We talked about this the last month as well. So that's good. And then the other thing as well is that, as we've been discussing for over a year now, Fidium's build out of Middlebury and Ripton. And of course, there's some areas in Middlebury and Ripton that are BEAD eligible, which of course we'll build if we're successful in that grant. But we don't need to go to the end of every single road in Middlebury and Ripton, except for to bring service to people that don't have. And because of that, it actually means that there's a lot less territory that we have to cover. And also, as Pat, I see you have your hand up. But also as a result of so much fiber being built out, it means that there's also there's less that we need to do, but there's also fewer areas in our district now that are eligible for us to build with grant funding. Zapata, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just have a logistical question because at the bottom of your slide, you say confidential, exempt from disclosure. And I'm just wondering with the recording that's happening, if you're providing that information in a public way.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. This is an old template. This isn't meant to be confidential. I'm well aware that we're in public session, but thank you for that. Sorry, I should remove those things. Okay. So what remains for us to do? So conceptually, I've had these conversations multiple times with the executive committee, but it's helpful to have them here with the governing board as well, so we're all on the same page. So conceptually, we have a couple different buckets, if you will, of things that need to happen. So there's areas that we can build with that leftover money from the Act 71 construction grants. There's areas that we hope to build with BEAD. There's BEAD middle mile, which is a nuance on BEAD, which I'll talk about in a second. And then there's the aforementioned areas that are not eligible to be built under any grants. And so this picture over here on the right shows you some of the fun complexity that we're dealing with. So these blue areas are areas that are not eligible for grant funding because every address on them is considered to be served. And the teal areas are BEAD middle mile, and the brown areas are BEAD. And what on earth is the difference between BEAD and BEAD middle mile, you might ask? So the BEAD program, essentially, it lists addresses that are BEAD eligible. But unlike the Act 71 program, where we could build 5 miles down the road to get to the one address that's not served, the BEAD doesn't work that way. BEAD has a hard cap that of the addresses served with distribution fiber under BEAD, only 20% of the addresses can already be served. So that means that you have to do some weird GIS gymnastics like this to designate all of these routes, because as you can see, a lot of these routes have a number of households on them. And if you start to build the entire routes, then you put yourself over that 20% threshold. So the teal routes, we can pay for, call it 90% of the cost of the route. We can pay for that under BEAD. But the final 10% to be able to actually bring service to all of those houses, we can't. And so we have to pay for that with private funding. So that's that. So are we all on the same page with what these different categories are? I'm going to presume yes.
Really, frankly, this is Paul. I do not follow, and I don't understand the picture either. But I don't think that should stop anything. It's just my own personal limitation. I think I don't completely follow the thought process here.
Well, if you don't follow it, you're probably not alone. So let me explain it again in a different way or a little bit slower, and then we can move on, because I do think it's important that everyone understands this. So I wish I could zoom in, but I'm going to struggle a little bit. Can you guys see my cursor?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So this is a good example right here. So these purple push pins, the purple and pink push pins, these are BEAD eligible addresses. So this purple push pin, for example, this is a BEAD eligible address. And as I mentioned, when we're submitting a BEAD project, there's probably, I don't know, 20 addresses between this road and this address, right? I mean, there's these 2 BEAD eligible addresses on the road. And if you have 20 ineligible addresses and 2 eligible addresses, that puts you outside of the boundaries of the BEAD requirement that says that for every BEAD address, for every 4 BEAD addresses, you are only allowed to have 1 served address. So all the addresses that we're serving with that grant, we can only have maximum of 20% be served addresses. So what we're allowed to do is we're allowed to build the fiber to serve this house and this house. So we're allowed to do the make ready and pay for the strand and pay for the cable to go up here and pay for the access for the splice case that will serve this house and the splice case that will serve this house. We're not allowed to pay for the splicing and the splice cases that will serve this. And that's ballpark about 10% of the cost. Don't quote me on that, but something along those lines. So when it comes to how we describe this area under our grant, we're going to say, all right, this is here's 2 addresses. We're building down this road to get to both of these addresses, and we're building to this address, and we're building to this address, and we're incurring all of the the terminology is middle mile, but we're incurring all of the middle mile costs of getting fiber to these houses, and we're not doing any distribution fiber or any drops to any of these houses. But of course, it's a shame to have fiber going from here to here and all of these houses and not be able to offer them service. And so and also, again, our goal as a district is to make sure that every address has access to fiber from at least one provider. So these addresses are all green because Comcast Xfinity serves them.
Oh, so may I interrupt?
Please.
So The reason we can't offer service to those homes in that green shaded area is legislative. It has nothing to do with the technology.
Correct.
We have the ability to do it. It's just that the law does not permit us to do it because Comcast has somehow figured out a way how to block us from offering service.
That's a fair assessment. And in terms of picking on the legislature, this is actually Congress, not Vermont. So this was
Yeah,
the law as passed by Congress has this rule.
yeah, and that is unfortunate for sure.
Question? Is that prohibition of service permanent, or does it go away down the road?
It's not actually a prohibition of service. What it's saying is that we can't claim the costs of providing that service against the grant. So
Oh,
we can absolutely use the fact that we paid 90% of the costs, and we can pay the other 10% ourselves to offer service to these addresses, but we have to do it with private funding. We may not do it with grant funding.
okay.
So that's a good clarification. And then finally, up here, you can't really see, but here's an example. This dark blue one up here, there's at least one address, maybe more, that are also served right now by Xfinity Comcast, and we can't include any of the costs of getting towards them under BEAD because there's no reason we would need to go up here under BEAD. This is the last address BEAD cares about, so going north of that needs to be on our own dime. And over here is another example that's same thing, same exact scenario. So here's a BEAD address. Here's the middle mile to get to this address. This little road that goes off to the side here, there's 4, 5, 6 houses. They're all served by Comcast. We're not allowed to build them with any grant money, but we can certainly build them with private money. Ben's got his hand up.
Thank you for the explanation. I think for me, my question is, irrespective of the color that the address is in on this map, is it our intention to offer, whether it's through private or BEAD funding, fiber to every address that's, as an example, on this map?
Yes, it's our intention to offer fiber to, it's our intention to make sure that every address in our member towns has access to fiber. And so if there's existing fiber there, we're not going to build it unless we're already incurring 90% of the cost under BEAD, and we may as well. So there's big swaths of Middlebury and Ripton, for example, that we're building down because we have to build on certain routes. You know how it is. There's only certain roads that go the places you need to go. So to get to the Halpin Road, we have to go on certain routes that you could probably guess. And so we'll be providing service on those routes and paying for the incremental cost, even though there's already fiber there and we'd be competing. But we may as well would help our business model because the incremental cost is so low. But this area here happens to be in Leicester, and in Leicester there is no fiber right now. There's only Comcast, Xfinity, and DSL. So the reason for showing you all this is that in terms of Maple Broadband achieving its goals, we need to make sure that it's not just as simple as saying, okay, well, it's going to cost us X million dollars to build, because we have different money and the different money has different restrictions on it. And so in order to be able to build this the most efficiently, I mean, we could just go out and get a whole bunch of debt and build it and not worry about BEAD, but that would cost us a lot more money and there'd be a lot higher debt service costs. And so as a result of the complexity of the rules of the grants we're applying for, specifically BEAD, I'm talking about here, we have to chop up our network into these different little areas and add them all up and figure out, okay, how much falls into each of the buckets. So I'm showing you this so the next slide makes sense. So the next slide is showing you, this is a bit of a cash snapshot. So the pre-construction grants, as you've seen in the dashboard, we're expecting to have about 775,000 at the end of the year. So what are our plans for that? Is 2025 operating expenses and then make ready, particularly in areas not eligible for BEAD, but just general make ready. It's allowed under that grant. Construction grants will have about 500,000, and with that, we're going to build eligible areas, and in particular, those not eligible for BEAD. Town ARPA will have 650, and this we can use it to. I mean, this is essentially private debt that has no interest on it, so we can use this for whatever we want. And these are some ideas of how we might be using it. And then the debt I've mentioned. So the reasons for the debts is there's areas that are not eligible to build under any grant. Working capital is, again, in anticipation of getting BEAD, we may want to get started on some of the BEAD middle mile routes ahead of time. And then when we're able to get reimbursed, we go and pay ourselves back, essentially. And then this distribution fiber along the BEAD middle mile routes, that's what I was talking about earlier. Those teal sections where the BEAD grant is going to enable us to build most of it, but the last little bit of being able to offer service to the houses along that route, we need to fund ourselves. And then I have this other thing in here, which is the district match anticipated, which I've caveated the heck out of, because if you recall, the Vermont legislature last session was actually the previous session, that there's a $30 million allocation essentially for CUDs for match for federal grant programs. And our anticipated amount that we're going to get into this is about $3 million for the entire district, which includes the Waitsfield areas. And I say it's approximate because it's not anything until we actually have at least a letter and eventually a grant agreement from VCBB. And also it can change because the legislature intended this to go to CUDs, that if there's certain CUDs that don't apply for BEAD or aren't successful in BEAD, then the amount that we get as our share of the 30 million might go up. Who knows? So this is really kind of a working number, and I have no idea when this money is actually going to be available to us. In a dream scenario, when we find out that we're successful in BEAD, we're able to have this money and use it as working capital immediately. But in the real world, that may not happen. So I've done the budgeting presuming that we don't see a penny of this money in the next financial year. Any questions on this? Then again, go ahead.
So if we don't see that district match, it sounds like we've already planned for that, but is that, does that become that bottom debt to kind of fill the gap, or how is that accounted for if it never happens or doesn't happen in the time frame that you expect?
Well, the district match is it's only a thing if we're successful in BEAD. So if we're not successful in BEAD, we don't get the match, but it doesn't matter because we won't need the match. If we are successful in BEAD, then we're going to get the match, and that match will count towards the amount of the 25% statutory match that is required as part of the BEAD program.
Okay. All right. I missed that very crucial detail. Thanks.
No worries. No worries. This I live in this stuff, and so it's not surprising to me at all that I miss a detail or two when I'm explaining it. Okay, so I'm going to move on. So sorry, this text is a little bit small here. So over here on the right is the BEAD timeline. This is straight out of the most recent BEAD request for application draft. And the headline out of this, as I shared last month, is that the way that this whole thing works is that the VCBB needs not only to figure out that we've won, because let's project success here. So the VCBB needs not only to decide that we have won in BEAD, but they have to pick the winners for all the different project areas throughout the entire state and submit that thing in one whack to the NTIA, and then the NTIA has to approve it. So their current time frame for submitting to the NTIA is the middle of July. Frankly, I think that date's going to slip. And then the NTIA is going to take goodness knows how long to approve it. And then we have to go through the paperwork of actually getting the grant signed. So I'm right now sticking with my projection that if we're successful, we probably won't get our grant paperwork until the fourth quarter of 2025. Maybe late the third quarter if we're really lucky, but I sure wouldn't count on it. And frankly, that may even slip until 2026. So the key question that this puts into my mind, and probably your minds as well, is how do we avoid losing a construction season on the BEAD routes? Because if you look also over at the schedule, it says that from March 4th to May 9th is subgrantee initial selection and negotiation process. So we submit our applications, they're due in early March. I'm sure March 4th they aren't going to pick the winners, but they will probably know the winners by mid-March or late March if this slips a little bit. So I'm figuring that we will know by April if we're successful or not. And then the question is, well, when can we start spending our money? Which is this other unclear thing around pre-award expenditures, because technically the start date of the grant is the date you sign your grant paperwork. But many federal grants, this is a well understood thing under uniform guidance, allow for pre-award expenditures, but the entity that's the grantor, the VCB in this case, needs to publicly state what's the earliest date that pre-award expenditures will be allowed. So That right now hasn't been stated. Hopefully they make it something like today, or the date the pre-proposal window opens, or the date the full proposal window opens, or something. Because if that's the case, and we know that we're getting the award, we just need to wait for the paperwork to come through, then we can again decide as a district, do we want to take the relatively small risk that things fall through and start spending money against that award, or do we want to wait until whatever, October, November, December before we start doing anything? So my budget that I've put together has assumed A, that we're successful, and B, that this pre-award expenditures date is early enough that we can do something, and C, that as a district we decide that we do want to do something. So I think Paul had his hand up.
Yeah, Ellie, can you go into presentation mode? That would be helpful in terms of being able to read the slide.
Does
Yeah,
that work?
that's much
Okay.
better, yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
That's it. I don't have any questions.
Okay, that's great. Anyone have any questions on this slide? Sometimes presentation mode does weird things, but I guess it's not in this case. Okay. So yes, so the final bit of context that I put together for you all, and this is something again that's been conceptually shared in the executive committee, is break-even analysis, because we really, again, we have two things we're trying to do. The first thing, build the network that we want to build and minimize the amount of debt service that we have to pay on that. So we're trying to build it as cheaply and fast as we can, maximize the amount that we're paying for with free money, with grants, or with interest-free money or low interest money. So that's what we're trying to do on the network build side. And then, of course, the other thing that we have to do to be successful is we have to make sure that we can continue to pay the bills, the pole rental and the insurance and the audit and the marketing and so on, after we have finished the network and after the grant money is run out. So that's why I put up the 775K that's going to be left in pre-construction, because right now, as you know from the budget, the vast majority of the items that we pay for in terms of operating expenses, so my salary, marketing, things like that, that all comes out of pre-construction. And so if we choose to use some of that for make ready, which again, I would choose to do, and that's going to be my recommendation when we actually get into the nitty-gritty of how do we pay for these things, is because again, if we don't, we have to take on debt and pay interest on the debt to pay for the make ready. So the key question is, when are we going to be having operational revenues at the point where we are going to be able to pay our operating expenses? So the break-even number of customers, and this by the way is a number that you should all be laser focused on as a governing board, just because this is the number that we need for essentially financial sustainability. So for break-even, we need 800 customers with a full-time executive director, and I should also parenthetically state and no other staff, and then 650 customers with a half-time executive director. Because again, I fully expect that by the time the network's built, there's not going to be the need for a full-time executive director. So, my real number has been that 600 number, but if you're going to be more conservative, you can look at the 800 number. So where are we? We are sitting right now at 446 customers that are live. So that's 56% of the 800 or 69% of the 650. We are up 366 from this time last year. And then the reason I put the aerial number in there is just that we're all well aware, and this is what the graph on the right is showing us, that we have challenges, people who have buried service or who need conduits. There are many of them. My little thing here is blocking my count, but there are 115 orders right now that need conduits and aerial, and 9 that need conduits. We have over 120 orders of people who would be able to get Maple Broadband service tomorrow if somehow they didn't need buried service. So that buried aspect is a real barrier to getting our take rate up. Having said that, I've done my best to account for that in the financial model, and the financial model is still predicting that we hit nearly 900 customers by the end of 2025. So that's with assumptions I've made around what we'll build, and hoping that we continue to hit the take rate numbers versus areas where we have no competition and areas where we're facing primarily cable competition. So will we get to 875? I don't know. I continue to refine that model, but I'm pretty darn confident that if we're sitting at nearly 450 right now, that by the end of next year we're going to be at 650. So that if we had to tighten our belts and cut our staff to be able to pay our bills, we'd be able to do that. Questions on
Ellie,
this? Yep.
Does the model assumes that we get the BEAD grant?
You mean in terms of the 875 customers?
Yes.
No, it does not. It presumes
Okay.
that we don't. It presumes that we don't build. It presumes that we. It does presume that we build a certain number of BEAD middle mile. Actually, you're right, Adam. It does. It presumes that we build some middle mile and launch service along some of the middle mile next year, but it doesn't. But the majority of the middle mile and all of the BEAD addresses are modeled in 2026. So this is mostly increased penetration in the existing 250 miles or so where we have service.
That's good news.
Yep. So we still have to hit it. And that's where our wonderful new marketing firm doing the market research to help us figure out better what messaging is going to resonate, what sort of customer incentives are going to resonate, and working on customer communications and culture around urgency of installations are all things we've been talking about for months. So hopefully those will bear some fruit next year. Okay, that was fun. So now that you guys are all having that context, Paul, go ahead. We can put up the budget and
Yeah,
talk about
Ellie,
it.
I'm just wondering, with respect to competition, do we have any legislative barriers to competitors coming in and undercutting us? Or do we have to simply rely on our ability to deliver a superior service at a relatively low cost?
The latter.
So Comcast could come in and decide to, build out more of their network and offer the service at a lower cost, and we'd be hurting.
Yep.
That's
I know, right?
okay. Okay, well, that's capitalism for you. So
Yep, that's capitalism for you. And by the way, to the degree that there are laws in other states, they're usually the opposite way, where they prohibit entirely municipal broadband because government shouldn't be competing with private sector, even when the private sector is a monopolist and acts like one.
yeah. I get it.
Anyway, so that's the political discussion for the day. So moving on, I'm going to share the budget that was distributed just to walk you through what is in there. Let me find it. There it is. Okay. Oops. Sorry, those are some of my working numbers. You don't need to see those. Okay. So let's start with, the 2024 pro forma you have seen already in the dashboard. So I'm going to start with the budget. So this is the budget of the end of year subscriber payments received. This is what the current projection is showing. Interestingly, the model is even showing a reduction in terms of the number of the installation revenue next year, but it's showing higher subscription revenues because we now have people that we've already received their installation fee, and yet we're bringing them on and receiving 12 months of revenues from them, hopefully, because our churn is still quite low. Interest income is lower because we have less cash in the bank. I've put a placeholder in the budget for installation subsidies in the hopes that a program may be developed that we may either wish to fund ourselves or to match. So it's just good to have a placeholder for that. So in terms of grants revenue, as you'll see, I'm projecting that essentially we draw down the remainder of both our pre-construction and construction grants. This actually sounds like what I said last year, but we weren't able to spend the money quite fast enough on the construction side, and we actually didn't need to on the pre-construction side. So, but that's the budget for next year. So that we draw those down, close them out, and as you'll see, we're not projecting, or I'm not projecting, any grant revenue from BEAD in this budget. Although who knows, it may still come. That's one of the other things which is unknown about BEAD is if fixed subawards are allowed, and if so, what the milestones might be. Because, for example, other states, for example, have agreed to, say, a 15 or 20% or 10% milestone payment on grant signature. And so if that's the case and grant signatures in Q4, we might actually see some BEAD money in Q4. But again, for now, not projecting any. The 2 million of financing you have seen, or we've talked about where that comes from or where that's going to go. And so how I arrived at that sum is that's essentially the sum of what we're going to need to build out the areas that aren't eligible under any grants, plus an allocation of middle mile costs. And I've included the 650K of town ARPA as part of that bucket of, so it's about 2.65 million is the total amount of money that I think right now we're going to need for that. I continue to refine that figure, and it may go up, may go down a little bit. So that number may, of all the numbers in the budget, it's the financing, and it's probably the financing number that's just the most likely to change before November. Mainly just because, as discussed before, if we don't need all this money next year, but we need some of it further into 2026, as I hone in on the BEAD budget further, then we don't want to be going out to the well twice for funding. So it would be better to go out once to get 2.5 million than to go and get 2 million and then get another 500,000 the next year. Okay, so the operating expenses, for the most part, these won't be really too much surprises. I mean, they're either I did bump up advertising and promotion a bit from last year's budget and this year's actual because, as previously discussed, one of the best returns on investment we can get is trying to get more subscribers out of our current network. And other than that, these are really just increments in costs that either reflect prior actuals or the marketing budget has gone down, for example, because we're paying less to. I had some things lumped in there that we haven't in the past. We put the research work that London Middlebury is doing there now. Sorry, the research work that London Middlebury is doing has caused our actual in marketing to be higher than what we budgeted. But going forward, we're paying, I think it's under half. Quite sure it's under half in the retainers to London Middlebury that we're paying to Pivot. So the budget going forward can reduce. Other than that, pole rentals will go up because we'll have more pole rentals. And other items are going up just a little bit as projected needed. And then I've also put down here, these are both very much thumb sucks, but I've put a line item for cost related to obtaining debt as well as interest or debt service, just so that we have place markers for them and they're not zeros. So we'll continue to refine what those might be. So any questions on OpEx before I move into the capital budget?
Ellie, this is Paul.
Okay.
On row 15, the subtotal operational revenues, that's the income from the subscription
Yep.
that have been sold, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, great, thanks.
Yep. Anyone else have any questions? Okay. All right. So the budget for 2025, some of these things are more finalized than others. So the detailed network design for all of the Virgin serving areas, all of the Leicester serving areas, and all of the remaining bits and bobs we still need to do in the Shoreham and Orwell and Cornwall serving areas, we have all that detailed design already paid for. And this is the amount, this is the budgeted amount from the bid that we awarded to JSI for the detailed design of the BEAD areas. And again, we're only going to pull the trigger and pay this money if we're successful in getting BEAD. So if we're successful in getting BEAD, we will start on the detailed design, and in the meantime, we'll build the areas for which there is already design. So permitting and right-of-way services and application fees, those I've budgeted higher amounts there because there are more hoops to jump through with BEAD, particularly around environmental permitting. So again, I'd rather have a little bit of headroom on the budget for what's required there. So the make ready, this is again just an estimated amount of how much make ready we're going to need for the areas that we would be adding. Quite a few of the areas that we'd be building next year are going to be the buried areas that aren't eligible with grant funding. And so for those, of course, we don't need to pay for make ready, but we do need to pay for materials, for construction materials, and labor. So this is the budget for materials and labor, and again, a ballpark figure for construction oversight. I'm planning right now that we'll really be hitting the ground running with the buried areas and the new aerial areas in, say, March or April, after the ground is busy unfreezing or has unfrozen. And again, this number might go up if we're able to get things accelerated on the beads timeframe, and that we're able to get some of that match money in sooner. Because actually, just another comment on the match money, that if we're successful in bead, like I said earlier, we will get the match money, and it's a significant amount. And that money can obviously be used towards the bead project middle mile, and that amount being so high, relatively speaking, is another very good reason not to be taking on. We would have to take on more debt if it wasn't for that match. But essentially, the legislature has provided us with some of the funding that we need to be able to do the necessary remaining work. Yeah. So I guess that's about it. Questions, comments?
Very good.
No,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that we're gonna be bringing in a little bit over $7.5 million, and we're gonna be spending a little bit less than 6 million, so that leaves us with a fair amount of cash in reserves, which is good.
Yeah, and interestingly, actually, you'll notice that the net change here is actually just a little bit shy of the amount of private debt, because we're planning to run a big loss for this year, which makes sense because we got a lot of construction money ahead of actually incurring the construction costs, and we're now busy building the network, and so our capital budget is huge. Our capital budget for next year is a little bit smaller than it is for this year, and it would be higher if the bead timeframe were accelerated and or we had more certainty around some of the rules that would enable us to do more investments. So I'm kind of splitting the difference in terms of assuming we'll be successful and making some happy assumptions around what we're going to be able to do, but not projecting bead revenues and not projecting too much activity. Because I think, as I said, I feel like I've said this 100 times, I think things will be delayed and there's just so much uncertainty right now. So as things start to pop out of the bead hopper and become more clarified in writing in the coming months, then hopefully before the end of the year, we can get more clarity, refine this further, and I can explain the differences to you and where they came from. So yeah, our projected beginning cash is about $1 million, and we're projected to end with about a little bit under $3 million. Okay, so if there's no other questions, I'm not sure that we need to do this formally, but it probably wouldn't hurt to have the governing board authorize distribution of these documents with whatever minor revisions we undertake by the end of the month out to our member towns for discussion purposes.
Is that something
So
we
I
need to
move-
vote on?
I'll
Sorry.
move to authorize distributing the budget documents and the PowerPoint deck that Ellie shared with us as drafts for public review, I guess.
I'm happy to second that.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Just one friendly amendment is the annual report in particular. I fully expect London Middlebury to make much prettier and maybe add some nice graphs and infographics and so on. So it wouldn't necessarily be the exact documents you've seen, but the contents would be substantially similar to what you have seen today.
Any discussion on this? Then we can put it up to a vote. All in favor? Aye.
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 All opposed? And abstained? Very good. The motion passes.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Are we moving on to the next item, Ellie?
Yes. So the next item is bead updates. Although I feel like we've been talking about bead for a very long time. But the updates on bead, as far as it goes, is that the VCBB published for public comment its request for applications about 2 weeks ago. And the submission deadline for comments and questions was 5 p.m. today. So I submitted 14 questions on behalf of Maple Broadband and participated in the by participated, I mean did a lot of the heavy lifting of drafting of I don't even know how many comments on behalf of Vacuda. So we have submitted lots of requests for clarification on the request for applications, and hopefully the VCB will take that under advisement. And I mean, I'm sure that they will. That's why they asked for them, and they'll be publishing a revised version of that hopefully soon. And there was another document that the request for applications referred to, which is, I forget what they called it, something like a detailed document on scoring and negotiation process, which of course is also going to be a very interesting read. And I don't say that facetiously, but it will be a very interesting read to understand exactly how these rules are going to be set, and make sure that we submit clarifying comments to make sure that we actually understand what they're expecting the responses to be. So that's going on. I don't have any other updates on the bead program. I see Rick has his hand up. I'm not sure if that's for voting or because he wanted to ask something.
No question. Sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Trying. There we go.
Okay, so that's all I have for you guys on bead.
Okay. All right, we're getting through the list here. We got about 15 minutes left. We're at number 9, the VCBB and Vacuda updates.
Okay, well, I'll start with the Vacuda updates. So Vacuda has been very busy with very little else other than commenting on the bead RFA for the last 2 weeks. And other than that, we're going to be starting to move our attention now that that's been submitted and we're balls back in the VCB's court. We're going to be moving our attention to our legislative agenda for 2024. So we have a list of things that we would like to get done, and the next step is to go through them and figure out which of them are actually legislative requests and which of them are more requests for liaison with the administration or other agencies. And probably nothing is really going to happen on any of that until after the election because so much is up in the air. So that's Vacuda. And on VCBB, the big news on the VCBB side is that one of the board members announced her resignation in the last board meeting. There was actually a special meeting last week, Monday. So Holly Groschner announced her resignation. And so at the moment, the VCBB has only 4 board members. And there is an appointment that will be made to fill her vacant slot by the Speaker of the House. So at some point, hopefully sooner than later, the Speaker of the House will announce who's filling that slot. So that's news.
All right. Moving on to other business. Do we have other business?
I have no other
Parking
business.
lot, I guess you might call it. Great. All right. Delegate appointments. Looks like we're just missing one appointment still, or
Yep.
From Whiting.
Yep.
Anyone know anyone from Whiting who could be a Maple Broadband delegate for their town? If you do, or you think of someone, let us know. Not sure what's going on with my camera there, but okay. Really, I guess, Ellie, do you have anything else other than notification for our next meeting?
I do not. I want to thank everyone for listening to this whole story and trying to do your best to wrap your head around the gymnastics that I have to go through to figure out how we're going to fund what we need to build. I know it's a little bit complicated, but it is important that you guys at least have a basic understanding of it. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Ellie. Okay, well, our next meeting for the governing board will be November 12th, a little more than a month from now. And unless there's anything else anyone wants to raise, I will move to adjourn this meeting of our governing board. I'll need a second, though.
Second.
Don't all speak at once.
All in favor?
Oh,
Aye.
Very
Aye.
good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Take care.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Ellie.